Good afternoon everyone, and welcome to yet another Data Quality Pro webinar. Today we're continuing our theme of insights into regulatory compliance, and today we'll be discussing the architectural options and challenges surrounding Solvency II. And I'm delighted to be joined by Stephen Mills and Kedar Jagtap of IBM Global Business Services in the UK. And some of you may have recognised the names there. Stephen Mills joined us for an earlier kind of introduction to Solvency II and a look at some of the core issues that are affecting the industry today. He joined us several weeks ago, and that webinar is actually available on the website as well, over on Data Quality Pro. If you search on the front page, you'll see the earlier Solvency II intro there. But today we wanted to go a little bit deeper. We had some good feedback from the first session. A lot of people said, "Oh, can we start to explore some of the deeper architectural issues there?" So we've invited Kedar along today as well to kindly go through some of the deeper architectural elements, and he's obviously got a strong architectural background there, so thank you, Kedar, for joining us as well. And for anyone on the call today, if you have any questions or you want to put throughout the webinar, feel free. You can add questions to the questions pane, or indeed add them to the chat pane as well. If you don't have access to those, perhaps you have to get away back to the office or something. You can certainly email me as well at editor@dataqualitypro.com. That's editor@dataqualitypro.com. But in the next few days, there will be a recording of this session going up on Data Quality Pro, so you can also add some questions into the comment section there. But hopefully, if you have some questions today, feel free to add them either during the session or at the end of the session, and we'll try and incorporate them into the webinar today. So that's me over. I'll pass you over now to Stephen Mills, who will give a quick introduction and talk through some of the early slides, and then we'll pass on to Kedar Jagtap. Thank you, Stephen.
Okay, thanks, Dylan. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining this webinar. As Dylan alluded to, on a previous webinar we did earlier in the summer, we covered a bit of an introduction into what Solvency II is all about, why it is happening at the moment, when it has to be in place, and a little bit about how it could be done, or how a Solvency II solution could be implemented. What we want to do in this webinar, as Dylan suggested, is to discuss a bit more on the specifics around the architectural solution that could be applied for Solvency II. And when I say architectural solution, I mean the solution architecture, the infrastructure, and the data elements of that part of the program. But before we dive into the architectural piece, let's just recap a bit about what we mean about Solvency II. Solvency II is a bit like Basel II was for the banks, or Basel III will be for the banks, and it's about embedding the right risk management processes into the business to ensure that the right level of capital requirements are in place. Solvency II, as we can see from the slide here, is based around the three main pillars. So pillar one being around putting in either the standard or internal model for capital evaluations. And this isn't just about putting the model in place, it's about making sure that the model is embedded into the business with the right processes around it, so that senior management can demonstrate that risk and capital evaluations are being used for business planning and strategic decisions. Pillar two is all about the ORSA, so a self-assessment on risk, and pillar three is more around the reporting requirements, so CP58, external reporting. So in the UK it's about reporting through to the FSA, as well as any internal requirements that the insurers may have for their own usage. So onto slide 3 that we've got here. How do we break down the requirements for Solvency II into a program of work? This becomes very complicated when insurers haven't done this before. This is a new piece of work. It's not like a regular project where you have a set of requirements to aim towards that the business has set down. So where there's a bit of ambiguity, what do you do? Well, our view on this is that this is broken down into 4 key areas. Now, 3 of these areas are dependent on the 4th. So 3 of the areas, risk management, internal modelling, and processes and transformation around Solvency II, are dependent upon information management and reporting. And what do I mean by that? Well, what we mean is that data is going to be required around any of the processes. It's going to be required around any of the risk models that are needed, and they're going to be needed as input into the actuarial models or the internal models. So therefore, data is key to any Solvency II solution. And therefore, you can look at the directive, you can look at consultation paper 43 and 58 around data quality and around reporting, and seeing that actually putting in place the right solution and data architecture is key to not only compliance but also to any future or broader benefits that an insurer is looking to glean from Solvency II. So without delaying any further, let me hand over to my colleague Kedar, who will go into detail around the solution and the data elements of a Solvency II solution.
Thanks, Steve. Good afternoon, everyone. What I'm going to try and do here is take you through a bit about the sort of what a logical architecture looks like from an IT implementation. So people who are familiar with say, a standard data warehouse type architecture may feel that this is predominantly a standard architecture framework. So you have the source systems, you have the sort of ETL type functionality, you have the warehouse, there are marts, and then there's a reporting layer and the subsequent layers around metadata and security. The bit that's different from a information management and reporting solution in Solvency II really, there's a couple of bits. One is this box in the middle called as the transformation calculation. So this is where typically actuarial and finance functions use sort of proprietary software, things like VIP, iTech, or Moses, or Profit, to actually run their valuations based on the various risk profiles that they have. So they calculate, for example, the market risk, operational risk, actuarial risk. And when we talk about Pillar 1 in Solvency II, if an insurance organization chooses to go down the route of the internal model, so you could choose the standard formula that that the regulator is providing, or you could go down the route of the internal model. Now, if you do go down the route of the internal model, then that's where kind of the fun and games start, as it were, is because then you will have to prove the basis of your assumptions, the data that you're using for these calculations, the metadata, the data governance around it, and that's where this whole solution becomes quite critical. The other bit that I was going to talk on this slide is, so you have the profiling, the warehouse, which is kind of standard. So you get your source data in, you create a warehouse, and then the warehouse becomes the central repository. But what's key is the non-functional requirements around Solvency II. So insurance organizations will have to do this more rapidly, more frequently than some of the other regulations. They will have to evidence what is it that they are producing. So, for example, initially, if you could have got away with saying, yeah, we have data quality policies, we have metadata management policies. But what's critical, and this is the word, evidence is the word in Solvency II. That's critical. Is can you evidence? Can you show the repeatability of this within your information management platforms? So that's the key. So if you take away one thing from this slide is it's not only strategies and policies. So it's not only the description of things. It's the operational effectiveness of how they're doing this is key. All right. So on the next slide, which are a bit loaded. Right, so how does then that transform the previous diagram into what we want to look at within Solvency II? So for example, if I pick up a few questions, so the questions that will be asked of any IT implementation in this context are you doing data quality properly, for example? Do you understand the data quality issues you have? Do you have plans to fix it? And actually, are you addressing those? So by sort of your internal model approval process, you will be asked to provide evidence of the effectiveness of your data management processes, for example, of your security policies, of the calculations, the transformations you are doing. So in effect, it's becoming more transparent, and it's not only that the internal functions need to understand it. These are the questions that the supervisor, so FSA in the UK, for example, and even your internal and external auditors will ask you. The auditors will scrutinize this data that your solvency architecture is producing. So you have your typical policy and claim admin systems on the left-hand side here. So you need to understand what data is present within those, and hence what is required in terms of the target model, for example, to produce the numbers, the calculations, the SCR and MCR calculations that are in Pillar 1. How do you provide that? How do you take it through the calculation engines? The key challenge that we are looking at and clients are facing are typically these calculation engines, the green box in the middle there. They are almost black boxes when it comes to interfacing. So how do you ensure that data lineage is maintained? So you could look at data lineage end to end. So you could actually put tool sets or solutions in place. But when it goes into something like a mathematical calculation engine, which starts doing valuations across the board for the next 50 years, what is it doing to the data that you put in? And what is it producing out as an output from that calculation engine? So maintaining that metadata lineage is quite important. And again, on the reporting side, it's while there is standard reporting, one of the key sort of the peculiarities about the architecture is this whole concept of adjustments. So in this architecture, you need to basically provide a capability to write back or data to the warehouse, which is not coming from the source systems. And by that I mean due to certain data quality issues, due to deficiencies in the mathematical models, the numbers that come out of these calculation engines may not always reflect the right risk profile that the organization wants to reflect, and hence the capital requirements may change. So you need the capability to provide adjustments to those figures, and you can't just do an adjustment. You can't just go and say, oh, the reserve figure is 2 million, I need it to be 3 million, I need to be 1 million. You have to, again, the evidence is important. Why are you doing this? Who has asked you to do this? And keeping that track and that trail of those adjustments is also key in this slide. If we move on to the next slide then. So I won't go through all the questions on this slide. I'll leave you to ponder on those questions, and I can take questions later on any specific bits you want. So while the information management capability is important, equally important is looking after the data, and again the evidence of that. So while you can have data dictionaries, you can have data quality policies and all of these, but the evidence, the use test. So the use test says how are you embedding your ORSA within your strategic, operational, and risk management processes within the organization. And data is absolutely key. I mean, one of the good things about Solvency II, to me, has been that it's brought the whole importance of data governance, not just the technical tool sets, like, just do profiling a bit here and bit there, but it's the whole gamut of data governance in terms of the data governance organization, the ownership of data assets, which kind of typically gets mumbled about within organizations, to the forefront. So it's almost enforcing organizations to take a serious look, but because it's no longer going to be good enough to say, yeah, we have this policy and this strategy, and we do data quality in this bit of the organization. The use test makes you show evidence that you are following that from end to end, how have you developed the internal model? So it also not only covers sort of post-production, it also says, show us how have you developed this model. Show us what data are you using. Show us what quality issues have you found. How are you addressing those issues? What processes and structures are in place to address these things. So there's the three pillars in there basically, which then address the data quality criteria that have come out of level 2 guidance, the appropriate, complete and accurate sort of criteria. To do those, you need to kind of start looking at creating a business sort of data dictionary almost, which is the first sort of column there. Then once you identify those critical data elements, so we started with looking at say 30 critical data elements that are key to the internal model. Then do few iterations, then start including more data items in scope. So go from the internal model to some of the source items, to some of the reporting items, and then start defining what this means, start defining where it's sourced from, start defining the lineage, start identifying who is owning this data. And from that you then transpose what COPS is saying around the accuracy, appropriateness and completeness into your organization's criteria around data quality. So this is what we mean. We think that sum assured should be in the range of X to Y for our organization. And then move on into setting up the data governance sort of roles and processes in place. So from day one then, if there is an exception or if there is a data quality issue, how do you deal with it? And then that sort of results into a set of fixed deliverables that go into sort of the overall data management framework here. So if we go to the next slide then.
Okay. Thanks, Kedar, for that. I think I appreciate that's probably a high-level run across architecture and data within a Solvency II solution, and it's something that I know Kedar could talk about for a very long time because there's a lot of depth, certainly around the data, around the modelling side, around the quality side, and the governance side. I think what I'd like to just leave with is actually, when you've got your data in place, when you've got your solution architecture in place, actually what are the benefits for an organization if we look post Solvency II, but also when you're embarking on this program of action, there's no doubt that insurers will need to build a business case around a Solvency II piece of work program to justify anything around data and systems, and we're not talking trivial amounts of money here. It will cost a large sum of money to be able to implement the right solution here. The obvious benefit here is for the insurer is that you are compliant. However, that is only one of the benefits, and actually that's not the biggest and best way to get a business case through. And I think in our experience of what we're seeing with clients is actually a bigger, broader business case will actually make it more achievable to get the case through to build the solution. Of course, there is the risk that if an insurer isn't compliant, then a big fine will come out of it. But the broader business case, which could include usages of that solution architecture and that data in other parts of the business, such as product pricing and rating, will get a better, or will be received better by the business. In terms of architecture and data, there are areas such as data governance. If you create a data governance framework with policies and processes and an organization from Solvency II, so you implement that within Solvency II, you've got something that's reusable that can be taken and rolled out to other parts of the business, so outside of actuarial, outside of finance, maybe into marketing, customer, etc. You've got something that can be reused and modeled elsewhere for different data domains. Similarly, with data quality management framework, you've got something within there that can be reused and applied to different sets of data. So you're not starting from scratch. But I think most importantly, you'll have an information management platform, if modeled and put together correctly based on the areas that Kedar has just discussed, can be reused elsewhere. And I think with where companies are at the moment, if we think about the timelines around Solvency II, we're talking about 2 years through to compliance. I doubt you'll see insurers being able to take off and do an enterprise-wide solution at the moment. I think we'll see that they'll do Solvency II-based solutions, but with the flexibility to broaden that out into other areas. So another benefit is being able to reuse that data that you're pulling together for a Solvency II requirement that's already been cleansed, that's already been transformed, and is already in the fit state to be used downstream for reporting maybe in different parts of the business. So benefits have got to be through data reusability, data governance processes being reused, DQM frameworks being reused, as well as the underlying infrastructure and license costs not being duplicated. So I think there are many benefits around Solvency II. It's about how you explain them, put them together into a compelling business case to get sign-off to embark on this program of work. So that's all I wanted to touch on there. Dylan, I guess it's back over to you, and let's open it up for any questions or discussion that people are after now.
Sure, yeah, obviously, as we mentioned at the start of the webinar, first of all, thank you, guys. That's fantastic bit of detail to add on to our continuing discussion there, and obviously there's a lot of information in there, so obviously this isn't a one-stop shop. If you go through the material and you feel like you have some more questions, then by all means add them to the debate on the site as well. But if you do have any questions now, you can add them into the questions pane or the chat pane as well, and we'll go through them. I mean, I just have one question myself, actually, just while people are obviously taking some time to write down their questions. The deadline, I mean, remind me again, Steve, of the deadline for Solvency II sort of completion.
So it was October 2012. It's now December 2012. So it gives insurers about 2 years to get their models and their external reporting in place to ensure compliance.
Okay, so obviously, going through the slides there, this is not a a 4-week kind of project. This is a major program of work. What are the key components within that type of architecture that companies should really be sort of focusing on right now? I guess obviously all of it's important, but are there any things that are absolutely critical based on where they should be on the timeline that they should be focusing on at the moment? Either obviously to Steve or Kedar for response on that.
Yeah, so I think in terms of an overall business architecture, there are many other, but in the context of, say, information management and data, because it effectively affects all the 3 pillars within Solvency II. So in the internal model in Pillar 1, to your ORSA within Pillar 2, to your disclosure, so reporting, external reporting type requirements. The key sort of tasks in terms of the architecture is lay down this foundational architecture around good practice information management. So start thinking about how are you going to stand in front of the FSA and claim that your spreadsheet-based landscape stands scrutiny in terms of the validation test, in terms of the ORSA requirements, in terms of the documentation evidence that you need to provide. So you do need to start thinking about, is your environment within which you carry out the various sort of risk management functions robust and controllable? So in this aspect, in terms of almost the key priority being the internal model, that's probably the first milestone that's coming across. So organizations who are choosing to go down the internal model route need to prove or provide evidence of the use test. So what we have seen is 2 types of architecture. So rather than biting the whole sort of strategic architecture, start looking at what's coming out of your calculation engines and see if you can create a more structured, controlled, and secured repository to actually use and store that data coming out of these calculation engines, and see if you can embed some of these things within your current organizational processes around analysis of change or sort of sensitivity analysis or stress testing, those sort of processes. So that's your first step towards going towards a use test. And secondly, then you start obviously looking at your data assets. So the quality of assets, what are the criteria, how do you start rectifying that? So I would say those are the two main things. And then obviously most organizations have group standard infrastructures, so see how you can almost leverage some of the things that you have perhaps learned from BAL 2 to start embedding that into a more enterprise architecture.
Thanks, Kedar. And we just had an interesting question coming in that kind of connects to that a little bit, in that someone on the webinar today asks, do businesses recognize that this will be a significant business change activity and not just an IT project? What are your views on that?
So I think absolutely yes, and I think our experience, and Kedar, jump in if you've got a view on this, is that we're seeing majority of the Solvency II programs are being driven out of the business and rather than out of IT, and IT are being asked to join the party, I guess, is one way of describing it. So I've seen it's being driven out of the business with support coming from IT as and when business decided what that program looks like.
Yeah, and just to qualify that, Steve, I think, I think while IT is a critical part of it, nevertheless, for example, a warehouse BI solution or a DQ management process is still one part of it. I think while the business side of the organizations realize there are these other bits around ORSA, around use tests, around the supervisory review processes and all of these things, this is quite a unique set of programs. So each of these pillars, in fact, is a project in itself. So in terms of program management, I think there is still a level of kind of consideration going on out there as to how do we structure this in terms of meeting all the various bits around risk management, around validations, around outsourcing, around policies, and IT, including one of those. So yeah, I think that there is a level of understanding and appreciation, but it's quite a massive scale in terms of meeting those challenges.
I understand. Thank you guys for that. Another question which has just come in is, how will Solvency II be enforced? And will organisations be compelled to spend investment on this by stronger enforcement than we have seen with other frameworks? So I guess the question is there, obviously you've got the FSA sort of changes and upheavals that are going on there. So I guess, should we start with the UK first of all? How will Solvency II be sort of enforced? Is there a difference between the UK and EU countries? What are your thoughts on that?
Right. I'll hazard a guess based on, because the key challenge is that the host countries, what we have so far is a directive from the European Union, and each of the countries is now adopting that or transposing those directives into local law. So level 3 guidance will actually try and coordinate and bring this together so that the law kind of is more or less the same across the various member states of the EU. But Solvency II is a bit more deeper. It is a bit more stringent across many of the functions. So if you compare this against IFRS or Sarbanes-Oxley, it is a bit more. It's not the main difference between, say, BAL 2 and Solvency is basically BAL 2 was a good set of directives. You should do this, whereas Solvency 2 is more up for interpretation, and that's where the challenge comes from, in my view.
That's thank you. So in terms of the enforcement, who will be the enforcement body? Again, let's take apologies for people. I know we've got several people on who are from non-UK, but for example, how will the UK enforce it? Well, obviously there'll be auditors, I take it, and what is the kind of the enforcement process? Have you got any feedback on that?
So the FSA will enforce it in the UK, and so will local supervisors enforce it within the various countries. But the FSA will enforce this for organizations which have claimed, say, the UK to be their home country. for example, an insurance organization could be sort of incorporated here, but they could operate within various EU countries, for example, France or Germany, so they could sell their products and services, but they will have to declare which is their home country, and the supervisor of that home country will basically enforce that. So they will have to go and seek approval of their internal model with the supervisor of the home country, which is, for example, companies based here will go to the FSA for approval.
I see. So the organisation has to go to the FSA to be approved. That they until they do that, they're not compliant. Is that how it works, or is? I kind of again, this is my lack of sort of knowledge on this area, but is it a case that you have kind of auditors who go around like policemen, or do the organisations have to come to the FSA to have their compliance certificate?
Yeah, in the end they will have to submit their ORSA, their sort of the SFCR reports, the RTS, which is in Pillar 3. They will have to submit that to the FSA, but they will also have to kind of have gone through the various audits. So they would have to kind of go to the auditors. Again, there's a very critical thing around auditors. The FSA, so the regulation will only recognize auditors which they have authorized within sort of the member states. So you can't just go to anybody for auditing your basically numbers. So you will obviously have the standard audit functions and internal and external auditor sort of scrutiny, but in the end you will have to submit your reports to the FSA for approval and compliance.
Okay, I understand. Just going back to one of the earlier other statements you made about the Solvency II being quite difficult in many ways because some elements of it are open to interpretation. I've got a good question here coming in from one of the people on the call saying, what are your thoughts around how to interpret the subjective data quality requirements of Solvency II?
Yes.
Nice open-ended question for you there.
If you want it. So, see, this is the beauty of it. So what they have said is the data quality criteria are data should be appropriate, accurate, and complete, right? But then they kind of give some guidance under the supervisory review process that accuracy, so data will be deemed accurate if, say, X and Y and Z are met, for example. But again, these are open for interpretation. So hopefully, level 3 guidance, when level 3 sort of material comes out, that might have a bit more interpretation around that. Alternatively, I think the way organizations may approach this, or certainly clients we are working with, is you describe what is it that you deem as fit for purpose data quality for your risk model. So as long as you can prove, you can define this is what we mean by data quality. For example, something needs to be is deemed complete if it's 99% kind of populated or 90%, for example, and you can evidence that, then I think that's what even supervisors would be looking for is are you defining something that is relevant to your business and your risk profiles, and are you actually implementing that, and is there evidence to do that? And then you can refine that as part of your use test, as part of your yearly ORSA.
So it sounds like then that the emphasis is much on the process and providing evidence, really, that not just the results, but actually demonstrating that you're actually going through the process of measuring data quality and things like that. So where there may be some kind of, like you say, with all these initiatives, I'm sure that there'll be some growing pains initially, potentially, where data quality accuracy is open to interpretation. We had a huge debate on this last week in one of the webinars, which went on for ages, and it's kind of gone online now. But what is accuracy and how much accuracy is required? So, am I right in thinking then that the Solvency II is as much about demonstrating your ability and your governance of these type of data quality metrics as alongside actually sort of reporting on them as well?
Yes, yeah, it is about, are you doing what you're saying you're doing? I think, and which leads to market confidence, for example. So it is pretty much about about that evidence about. So it's not a regulation, and it's a compliance is not achieved by signing a paper on a dotted line saying, yeah, we have done this. It's about showing, it's about evidencing that you have done it. So you have to provide various documentation, access to your systems, access to your data, your policies, how you're doing this. So it is about a bit more, maybe intrusive is not the right word, but it is about opening up more access to some of the core fundamentals that drive your core business and your risk management, basically, within the organization.
I understand. And again, we've had another question just come in asking what evidence do you believe will be required by regulators in order to prove data quality compliance, and that's so back on the data quality theme. I mean, are you seeing companies sort of buying data quality tools to use the dashboarding there, or is the data so complex that doesn't really fit it? How are you seeing organisations gearing themselves up for the data quality compliance aspect?
So I don't think there is a box which needs to be ticked which says data quality is compliant. I think it's more around how it's embedded within the rest of the evidence. So, for example, you need to show evidence of how you are validating your sort of your results. So there's sensitivity and stability analysis or stress testing. So you might use some tools to do that, but evidence around that would be, okay, how are you making sure that the data that's going in is of appropriate quality, accurate and complete. So in terms of documentation, for example, you have to evidence, do members of your organization understand data quality as a concept, and are they capable and are they skilled enough to meet to work within a data governance organization, for example. So I'm not quite sure myself as to how would the form of data quality compliance take shape, because it's so embedded across all those pillars and across everything that you're going to do, not just within IT, but also within your processes, your people, your training, and in your audit functions, for example. So while you define the criteria for the data that's physically used, I think that the remit of data quality is going to go a bit beyond our typical source, warehouse, data mart kind of data flow. It's going to go a bit more beyond that in terms of decision making and organizational sort of use test purposes.
I see. Thank you, Kedar. One last question then. What technical options are you seeing implemented on the ground? Okay, so I think listening to this discussion on the previous one before, I guess there are three kind of options, am I right? So you've got the spreadsheet kind of option, which I see a lot of people talking about that on some of the LinkedIn forums, that people are doing things in spreadsheets, which I guess is probably the most popular data management tools in most companies. Then you've obviously got the Solvency II type specific architectures that you've obviously talked about today. But obviously, as you were talking today, you were talking about the enterprise-wide solutions where you could take that architecture you've built, which is essentially I guess like a business intelligence or a corporate reporting type environment, and then obviously leverage that and cross-sell that, I guess, into other departments, other subject areas. So, of those three kind of high-level, sort of architectures, where do you see companies investing their time and energy? Are they doing this spreadsheet, Solvency II specific, or enterprise-wide?
So I think if we go back to the point I made earlier, I think what we're seeing is that if you look at the time that people have got left, or insurers have got left, it's 2 years before Solvency II is going to be enforced and compliance needs to be met. 2 years may at face value appear like a very long time, but in reality, if you break down a Solvency II program into the areas that we looked at earlier on, you've got the 4 areas, and even within information management, 2 years isn't a very long time. To put in an enterprise-wide solution would take a lot longer, and it would take substantial amounts of money and a relatively big workforce to put that in place. I think, as you've already indicated, what we're seeing is people are heading towards the middle ground, which is what do we need to do in order to be compliant by 2012, but also as this is unlikely to be a small investment, then actually it makes a lot of sense to look at how could this be expanded later on. So what does life after Solvency II look like? How could that data be reused? How could that infrastructure be reused? If only in finance, maybe as a start, but obviously there are other benefits to look about across other parts of the business, underwriting, in finance, product introduction, pricing and rating of those products that already exist, reuse of the existing data rather than creating separate silos of that data elsewhere. So I think what we're seeing is, to summarize, people are building a specific Solvency II solution rather than reusing and rather than using an enterprise-wide solution, but from what we have seen, they're all being built with a view to expand and flex at a later date once compliance has been met.
Fantastic. Okay, Steve. Well, I was going to wrap it up there, but we've had a couple more questions come in, and I know you guys have got jobs to go to, but I just want to put this next one to you, if that's okay. And it says, should data quality measurement and issue resolution be undertaken by the business utilizing a data quality tool or implemented by IT as part of an ETL process? Okay, so it's quite a technical thing, I guess, but what are your views on that? Should DQ measurement be data quality tool based, or because you obviously you had some ETL architectures in there as well in the Solvency II architecture you were showing. I mean, essentially, Solvency II is in many ways. This kind of ties into another question we just had just before that. Actually, I was going to kind of do afterwards, but the person saying, is Solvency II driving data quality change and MDM change, obviously both in culture and processes around an organisation. So, taking this from a high level, then, is Solvency II kind of driving real change for data quality, such that we're not just kind of doing reactive cleanse and this kind of thing? What's your view on that? There's several points there, but how do you see organisations tackling data quality moving forward?
Okay, so I think it's definitely bringing it on the forefront of what needs to happen around data quality. So it's definitely almost increasing the importance of data quality amongst a group of people who may not have previously accepted or acknowledged that importance around data quality. In terms, so going back to the question around implementation and sort of use or control or going forward. So you would look towards, for example, an IT department to implement the various tools, the tooling or the solutions, or embedding data quality within the sort of data processing environment. But it is absolutely the business that needs to own the quality of their data and the subsequent sort of processing. So the data governance organization that was on one of the slides, it encompasses these data stewards and sort of the typical data governance framework where business in the end is responsible and owns the data that they use, whereas IT basically provides the solution where that solution involves a technology component to it, because data quality is not just about the profiling tools or the data stewardship or the data quality tools. It's also about the process and the people involved in solving those. So yeah, I think in summary, absolutely, governance and quality is at the forefront. There is a specific paper, CP 43, I think, on data quality so it is absolutely a key criteria on Solvency II and hence has to be taken seriously. And Solvency II is helping, I think, in bringing this kind of key important concept around data management to the forefront.
Fantastic. That was so refreshing to hear that, I think, because so often we see these kind of slides and pictures from companies, obviously sort of really on the vendor side, where these things are kind of seen as a silver bullet, and I think the message really is that Solvency II is business driven, but also has to be, obviously IT have a part to play, obviously in helping to procure and acquire the right technologies, and obviously bring on board partners and obviously train technical staff where required. But I think, I think in many ways it's coming at the right time, because I think the data quality technology we are seeing now is far more aligned to the business, far more aligned to the kind of the business stewards and the data stewards. So I think it's I'm certainly seeing a lot of activity from the vendors who are asking about Solvency II, and obviously getting involved there. But I think that the key message has to be this, that kind of comes secondary. That the business has to figure out what their data is, where it is, and the quality it needs to be. So that's really refreshing to see. I think if we'd have gone back 10, 15 years, a lot of these things would have been driven by IT, and they've just gone round and round. And so it's really encouraging to hear that, obviously coming from someone, obviously from you guys, are obviously down in the trenches, kind of delivering these projects. So I think we better wrap it up there. We were meant to be sort of 20 to 30 minutes. We're now on to 45 minutes. We've had some really good questions come in. So I just want to thank Stephen Mills and Kedar Jagtap today. So thank you for coming on the session today, guys. And we're going to obviously create a recording of this session. It's going to go up on the website probably in 2 to 3 days. And if you have any further questions, feel free to post them onto the site alongside the post with this video on there. But thank you again. It was a great session, and I don't think this is going to be the last one. I think we're going to have some more discussions on Solvency II, obviously as the 2012 deadline draws nearer. But perhaps we can get down into some of these other sort of component areas that we discussed today, and have some follow-up sessions. But thank you again, Stephen. Thank you, Kedar, and thank you everyone for joining on the session today.